what's discussed is essentially a consolidation of forces. I mean, Donetsk and Luhansk are pretty ruined. Now, Russia hasn't conquered all of Donetsk, but if the deal is it takes the rest of Donetsk and in fact then gives back Kherson and Zaporizhzhia to Ukraine, then you have a kind of consolidation where both sides can say they've regained some territory.
Let's begin then with President Trump's highly anticipated meeting with Vladimir Putin of Russia, which will take place next Friday in the US state of Alaska. The two presidents are expected to discuss the war in Ukraine. Of course, there is no guarantee it will actually stop the fighting, since Moscow and Kyiv remain far apart on their conditions for peace. President Trump, though, told reporters we're getting very close to a deal, and there will be some swapping of territories to the betterment of both sides. These developments have taken attention away briefly, I suppose, from the Middle East, where Israel are making moves to take over Gaza City. Let's try and make sense of all of this with Steven Erlanger, Chief Diplomatic Correspondent of the New York Times. Stephen, good morning.
Good morning.
Good to speak to you. Let's start then with the announcement of this summit, this get-together between Putin and Trump in Alaska on Friday. What do we know about it? What did President Trump say? What are the details as things stand?
Well, they're all a little vague, but it will be, as you say, in Alaska. There was some talk it might be in the Middle East or in Turkey or somewhere, but this makes sense. Look, I mean, Trump has this magical belief in his own power to negotiate face-to-face with someone. You know, he thinks of himself as the great deal closer. So he's wanted to meet Putin. Putin has desperately wanted to meet Trump. Trump wants to end the war. He certainly wants to end the bloodshed. He wants a ceasefire. I'm not sure he understands what ending the war actually would entail. So this is inevitable, I think, this meeting. The problem with it for Zelensky, for the Ukrainians, is that it will be done over their heads. And then we may discover that Putin and Trump have agreed, for example, on these land swaps in ways that Ukraine doesn't really like. And that would put Zelensky in a very uncomfortable position.
We will get some Ukrainian reaction on the programme before 6:30, but I'm interested, Stephen, in your take on the almost throwaway comment from Trump about the land swaps, which is significant and is something the Ukrainians have really and understandably dug in on, that Russia's aggression can't be rewarded with territorial claims that are recognised internationally.
Well, that's the issue, recognized internationally. I don't think the Ukrainians look, I mean, if Ukraine can remain a sovereign, independent state, that's the key thing, even if it loses some territory, at least notionally. But to give it up forever, I think would be a step too far for Ukraine, much like the Baltics. I mean, they were annexed by the Soviet Union, but they preserved their sense of independence. A lot of countries like the United States refused to recognize that annexation, and years later, they were freed. So this is a way to work. In the meantime, Ukraine's not winning back all of this territory. It's not winning back Crimea. And if you're going to have a ceasefire, you're roughly going to have troops pretty much in place. So what's discussed is essentially a consolidation of forces. I mean, Donetsk and Luhansk are pretty ruined. Now, Russia hasn't conquered all of Donetsk, but if the deal is it takes the rest of Donetsk and in fact then gives back Kherson and Zaporizhzhia to Ukraine, then you have a kind of consolidation where both sides can say they've regained some territory. But the idea of Ukraine suddenly, objecting to everything because it doesn't get everything back, I think is a bit of a fantasy.
Fantasy, sure, but this is the very definition of rewarding Putin, isn't it? And actually, having the meeting in the first place can be seen as rewarding Putin. Having it on US soil in Alaska, which, by the way, used to be part of the Russian Empire,
yes.
Of course,
yes, it did.
Is also a reward for Putin.
It was sold legally, however.
Well, yeah, but isn't there still a claim? Aren't some Russian nationalists particularly dismayed at the fact it's not still part of Russia?
Yes, of course.
There's all sorts of history wrapped up in this thing. So are we not pointing here, Stephen, at every stage to Putin getting exactly what he wants?
Well, I think Putin is getting partly what he wants, partly because Putin is pretty much, he feels he's winning the war. So it's, concessions are a matter of political skill and taste. I think he sees Trump as his best instrument for getting parts of Ukraine that he hasn't yet been able to win by military force. But the Ukrainians are exhausted too, don't forget. I mean, both sides are really quite tired. So a ceasefire, a break that could ideally produce a much longer term cessation would, I think, be good for both sides. The fact is, though, I don't think Putin's aims have changed. He wants Ukraine to be a vassal state. He wants Ukraine to be more like Belarus, which is pretty much in the power of the Kremlin, and he doesn't want it to be a NATO member. He doesn't want it to become Poland. Now, those are his aims, and I think he sees Trump as a very good instrument for achieving those aims.
One of the other considerations here, Stephen, of course, is the role of the Europeans, which frankly seems to be quite non-existent, if we're honest. But apparently Ukrainian officials were briefed by President Trump and his envoy, Steve Witkoff, in a series of calls this week. But they are concerned that Putin is using this as cover, really, to try to avoid US sanctions and tariffs, all the while continuing the war. But the point of this is really that the Europeans are kind of nowhere.
Well, that's been true actually for some time. At the same time, it is worth saying the Europeans have been quite committed, including Keir Starmer, to supporting Ukraine, to defending Ukraine, to keeping Ukraine independent and sovereign. Now, realistically, they know Ukraine isn't going to win everything back in 10 seconds. It may not be possible in 10 years. The important thing is to preserve the independence and sovereignty of a free and democratic Ukraine. And if that means Ukraine in less territory for the next whatever, then I think that's worth doing. That's what the Europeans are fighting for. They don't like this idea of land swaps. There are lots of things they don't like, but they are committed to helping defend Ukraine. And so far, the United States is quite willing to sell weapons to the Europeans to give to Ukraine. But the Europeans have promised security guarantees for Ukraine. And I think we should take all that very seriously. That is a serious commitment on the part of NATO and Europeans.
Well, I just want to have a listen to what President Trump had to say about that issue of land swaps that you mentioned there, Stephen. Here is the president.
Well, you're looking at territory that's been fought over for 3.5 years with, a lot of Russians have died, a lot of Ukrainians have died. So we're looking at that, but we're actually looking to get some back and some swapping. It's complicated. It's actually nothing easy. It's very complicated, but we're going to get some back. We're going to get some switched. There'll be some swapping of territories to the betterment of both.
Can you picture a day, Stephen, where President Trump declares peace for Ukraine, and actually what does that do for him and his legacy?
Well, I think he can declare a ceasefire. It's a long-running fight, and I think both sides are not willing to give up, not in principle. But Trump wants the win. I mean, he would like to end the fighting in Gaza too. I mean, he doesn't get too deep into the weeds, frankly. I think Putin is manipulating Trump's great desire for a big media moment, a big victory moment. But the real roots of this battle will continue, as they will in the Middle East, too. Even if the fighting in Gaza stops, it doesn't bring an end to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, not at all.
And just a final question for you on Gaza as well then, Stephen. Vice President Vance is in the UK. He's been meeting with our Foreign Secretary in the last kind of 24 hours. He's here to start a family holiday ultimately. But I just wonder his kind of, I suppose, condemnation really of the UK government's approach to recognising a Palestinian state is also sort of in line with what Ambassador Mike Huckabee was posting last night. He's President Trump's ambassador to Israel. He posted, or he quote tweeted Sir Keir Starmer, who was critical of the Israeli government's decision to escalate the offensive in Gaza. And Ambassador Huckabee said of that, "So Israel is expected to surrender to Hamas and feed them, even though Israeli hostages are being starved. Did the UK surrender to the Nazis and drop food to them? Ever heard of Dresden, PM Starmer? That wasn't food you dropped. If you had been PM then, the UK would be speaking German." How would you assess relations between the US and the UK when it comes to approaches to the Middle East?
I wouldn't take Huckabee very seriously, by the way. I mean, Huckabee also believes the West Bank should belong to Israel. I mean, he's the ambassador. He doesn't make policy. He's a former governor. And I wouldn't, the words are offensive, but I wouldn't take them very seriously. What is more important is the United States does believe it is wrong to recognize a Palestinian state that doesn't exist. The United States, like Germany, by the way, like other serious countries too, believe that the only Palestinian state that should be recognized is one that emerges from negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and it can't be wished into existence. And a lot of people do feel that by trying to leverage recognition to force Israel to do things, Prime Minister Starmer has both hardened Hamas's position in these talks and hardened Israeli positions. Yeah. So there are legitimate questions. You can say that's right or wrong, but that is the American position.
Stephen, thank you very much. Thanks for speaking to us this morning. Steven Erlanger is Chief Diplomatic Correspondent of the New York Times.